Now, just as the US has emerged as a champion of fossil fuels, what we have seen in the last few years is, of course, a completely different level of application of sanctions. We have even seen the seizure of sovereign assets. And that global needle is moving because there is today a tendency to weaponize almost everything. They are seeing unprecedented changes. In fact, probably every conference believes that they are discussing unprecedented changes. But this time, it's for real. So I do want to say that turbulent times may actually be an understatement. I hope prosperity is not. And I would begin really with the landscape when we speak about turbulent times. My point would be that by every metric of measuring the international economy, of assessing, in a sense, the state of the world, we are actually going through an extraordinary and intense period of change. And let me give you a few examples. Let's start with the most basic, which is production. And what we have been seeing is that when 1/3 of the world's manufacturing has shifted to one country, it's had very significant consequences on the international economy. It has had consequences on the supply chains. It has had consequences in terms of leveraging such a dominant position. But equally important, it has elicited political and, I would say, socio-economic reactions from many other countries. And today, in fact, this shift is one aspect of the contradictions which characterize our current world. Let me shift to a second metric, energy. Again, one of the big changes of the last few years has been that the United States, which for decades worried about its exposure to external energy requirements, has not only become self-sufficient, it is actually today a significant exporter of energy and has made that energy exports an important part of its strategic outlook. Now, just as the US has emerged as a champion of fossil fuels, China has also established itself actually as a leader in renewables. So pretty much any path you take on renewables, finally all roads lead back there as well. Well, let me shift to something else, data. That when we look today at the models before the world, we have an American model, which is very unrestricted, private enterprise driven. We have a Chinese model, very statist. We have a European model. In many ways, we have an Indian model. And no doubt there would be others as well. Deriving from that, related to that, if one looks at the role of big tech, now there have always been big companies driving the global economy, but the position, the salience of big tech in today's world really represents a new level of prominence and influence of a few companies. I come back to trade. And what we have today, starting end to end, I said production and therefore concerns about concentration there. Then the worries about supply chains and the narrowness and fragility of supply chains. And then now the concern about overexposure or dependence on single markets. So really end to end today, it looks much more anxious than it did a few years ago. A different dimension is connectivity, where we have new routes which are being built, some man-made, some being opened up by nature. and which have really, particularly the polar route, the ability really to revolutionize logistics as we know it currently. And when it comes to finance, what we have seen in the last few years is, of course, a completely different level of application of sanctions. We have even seen the seizure of sovereign assets. We have seen the advent of crypto. As I said, by every metric, even in terms of resources today, the competition for rare earths and critical minerals is become a very major factor in competition between nations. And what it has also seen in parallel is a return of technology controls which people thought was beyond them, behind them in the era of globalization. When it comes to mobility, demographic demands are competing today with social reactions to mobility. And there is a tension there which is playing out in different societies. And of course, the nature of weaponry, the nature of war has today fundamentally changed. We have seen that in multiple conflicts, starting with Azerbaijan, Armenia, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Iran. So contactless war, often with standoff weapons, but which can have a very impactful, sometimes even a decisive outcome. These are today the characteristics of this landscape of these turbulent times. And of course, the sentiment which characterizes these turbulent times is a growth in the opposition to globalization in many parts of the world. Now, it's not just that all of this is happening. All of this is also happening in a very short time frame. So the intensity of these multiple happenings actually converging on the global economy at the same time. This is today actually setting into motion a paradoxical situation where, on the one hand, the very factors which I referred to encourage higher risk-taking. At the same time, because of the consequence of this, there is a serious effort also to de-risk every facet of both politics and economics. So this playing out of, it's almost like you're raising the height of the trapeze and removing the safety net with each passing day. And that is really today the state of the international polity. Now, the strategic consequences of this, I think, are quite obvious. We have seen a weakening, sometimes even discarding of international regimes and rules. We have seen economically that cost may not any longer be the definitive criteria, that ownership or security or reliability, resilience is equally important. We have seen politically that alliances and understandings are being revisited. We've also seen in a few cases, in the cases of really the major polities, that their belief in balance of power is probably much less. They seem to think they may not need the rest of the world as much as they did before. So if they have margins of power, they're prepared to exercise those margins in pursuit of their policies and actions. We have therefore seen overall the global needle move much more towards competition and away from compacts. And that global needle is moving because there is today a tendency to weaponize almost everything. And that if a state has a tool in its toolkit, an instrument to be used, there is much less reticence, particularly on the part of the major powers, to use that.